Hi everyone, Teddy Baldessar here, back, familiar face, Joe Kirk. Great to see you as always, sir.
Great to see you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So today, this is a subject that we've actually not talked about before. We've talked about all the different subjects, I feel like, surrounding Grand Seiko, but there's one area that we've neglected, and that's 9F. So one thing that I think people think about when they're talking about 9F is they see it as this entry point, but that's probably selling 9F pretty short. Yes, it is the entry point, but there's so much that is involved with the technology of 9F, and if you look at a lot of these other breakthroughs from Grand Seiko, you see some of these foundational elements that were breakthroughs first with 9F that allowed things like UFA to run, and there's so much here that I think you can appreciate beyond this just being a point of entry for the brand. So I'm going to start with a very loaded question. Why is 9F different when you're talking about quartz technology?
Oh, I mean, there's a lot of answer to provide you in that.
I said it was loaded.
Yeah, of course. So, I think that, if you look at the history of quartz, and especially in Seiko, when they made the first quartz wristwatch sold in the world, the Astron, right? The idea was pretty simple and straightforward to, make time essentially as precise as possible, and it utilized a battery as the power source as opposed to a mainspring of a mechanical watch. And so, how do you make this energy efficient, right? Because battery consumption was very high back in those days in 1969 and through the 70s. And so energy efficiency is one of the big keys to success. But when they created the 9F in 1993, I think it was with a simple aim in mind, is to create something that can last and is built and engineered more like a mechanical watch than your typical quartz watch, while at the same time reaping the benefits, every benefit you can possibly think of quartz as well. So if I had to sum up 9F, basically I would say that our simple aim was to create the quartz that surpasses quartz, right? That we wanted to create a quartz that can be handed down to the next generation, something that is not disposable, but actually serviceable and made with longevity in mind, while also ultimately being ultra precise.
So, statement I always hear, and we just throw it out there, is like Grand Seiko fanatics, is like we harvest our own the quartz crystals.
Yes.
So could we just take a little bit of the veil away and describe more around that process? Because we always hear that being like as a concept of why 9F is different, and really just Grand Seiko is different, but how is that actually done, and what are some of the steps for that?
Yeah, so with quartz crystal, basically we have our quartz forest where we grow basically in autoclaves, these giant towers that are submerged into the ground, high heat, high temperature, and it starts as a thin sheet you call a seed, and then turns into this giant block, which is probably the length of my forearm.
Wow.
Right? That gets broken down, and then all the quartz oscillators then eventually are cut into the tuning fork shape. So the process is similar to that of a synthetic diamond, and the reason to do that is you're eliminating any impurities, as if you were to mine the quartz, right? You would get rid of the impurities by harvesting, in-house grown synthetic quartz oscillators. So that is kind of a big one. It's often talked about by our customers and fans of the brand. Is I can't believe you grow your own quartz in-house, and that's pretty remarkable to me too.
And then in terms of making sure that it's going to oscillate at this high frequency for a quartz crystal, I mean, we're talking over 32,000 times per second. So how are you ensuring that that is going to maintain its rate? Because we're talking 10 seconds a year of accuracy. Standard quartz movement, I mean, if you can output 15 seconds a month, that's pretty stellar. But now we're talking about 10 seconds a year.
Yeah, there are many QC steps in the process, from looking at the actual quartz blocks themselves, inspecting the quality visually, and then once they're cut into the tuning fork shape, we will test them across varying temperatures. We actually artificially age them for 90 days, so basically 3 months in a controlled environment to ensure stability and accuracy. I think there's a lot of misconception in quartz. It's not that they think about the quartz oscillator, they think about the battery. And it makes it disposable, and it makes it sound cheap. And so quartz has sometimes a bit of a stigma to it, right? It's a little frowned upon because of this disposable aspect compared to a mechanical watch, which can be handed down. Now, as I mentioned, 9F, our goal is to be the opposite of that. We want to make sure that the quality of our oscillator is exceeding the norm, right? But the reality is the oscillator is the quartz. The balance wheel is the oscillator in a mechanical watch. So you cannot compare an actual quartz crystal to anything but a balance wheel in terms of timekeeping. So balance wheel is about 4 hertz, right?
Yes.
4 complete oscillations within 1 second, where a quartz oscillator is 32,768 hertz.
Yes.
And so that many oscillations in 1 second is the reason for the ultra high accuracy, right? Less margin for error, let's say. And so the quartz oscillator may drift in its accuracy over time. So, we want to make sure when you buy a 9F that it's stable right out of the box. So this is why we do this 90-day aging process. It's very important to ensure high stability on the quartz oscillator. That basically, if you were to buy a typical quartz oscillator right out of the box and no aging, maybe in the first year or two, you might see some changes or discrepancies in the accuracy compared to the previous years of ownership. And we don't want that to happen. So we do this synthetic aging process. Then we test across the varying temperatures to ensure that the oscillator is stable across all temperatures. And we specially select the crystals based on their reactions to temperature.
Are those human selected? Like that's with like a naked eye microscope, or how is that
It's
identified?
more looking at the data, the reaction to
Okay.
actual temperature while it's being tested. So when you're testing across varying temperatures, you can see the oscillator's reaction, and then you can determine if it falls within the right range naturally, then it's specially selected. But on top of that, we also have what we call temperature compensation or thermal compensation.
Because if you look at traditional quartz watchmaking, I mean that rate is pretty standard for a quartz watch.
Yeah,
it has
of course.
that piezoelectric effect. It's going to vibrate and at that specific rate, and working with that IC to be able to have that accuracy. But you have this temperature compensation, which seems like the other breakthrough that allows you to achieve this level of accuracy. Because one of the challenges I would imagine is just being able to, with this varying degree in 10 seconds a year. That's like where a high precision quartz, higher frequency quartz movement too, because you've been able to stay at this traditional rate. So is temperature compensation really the breakthrough that allows that to happen? You're not changing the oscillator's frequency. You're just able to adjust and ensure that it's getting that message from the IC, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So what we do with 9F to ensure that high stability is consistent across varying temperatures is during that testing process, we determine the reaction of the quartz has to the varying temperatures, and we pair it with an integrated circuit that's ultra low power that knows how that individual crystal reacts to temperature and is programmed to compensate it accordingly. So each individual crystal has its own individually programmed IC to pair perfectly with that watch to ensure that 540 times a day, or just over every couple of minutes, it's detecting the temperature and compensating if necessary.
And then one other question I would have, you mentioned earlier this year when we were sitting down talking about the UFA, this regulator switch. And
Of course.
something that was interesting for me was learning more about how quartz movements and a quartz oscillator can be actually fine-tuned and regulated. In a mechanical watch, it's usually done by either balance screws, it could be done by lengthening and shortening a hairspring, but there's actually a way to make some small adjustments to a quartz oscillator as well.
Yeah. You have to keep in mind too, we had temperature compensation back in the 70s. So temperature compensation is not new, and we've done a variety of different ways throughout the company, as Grand Seiko and independently, but Seiko as well. In the history of quartz development, there's so many amazing breakthroughs. But temperature compensation nowadays, we have it. 1993. It's over 30 years going strong, 9F, and no real changes. So I think that's an important statement actually for a quartz movement. It's kind of a piece of technology in a way, but at the same time, it's stood the test of time, which technology typically does not do. So I think that there's something very special about 9F in that regard. But when it comes to long-term serviceability, again, I'm always stressing the longevity of 9F, that regulation switch, that ability to adjust the accuracy. After many, many years of use, let's say you hand it down to the next generation, and all of a sudden it's not within 10 seconds a year. It's 11 seconds, accuracy per year, and that drives you crazy, right? Send it to the service center, they adjust it, and it's perfect. It's right back within range. It's a very simple process, and that's the beauty of this 9F is that it's easy to maintain.
So another thing I noticed when we were in Shinshu was watching some 9F assembly. It followed more of a mechanical watchmaking assembly process than a quartz assembly process. And that came down to, I think when we were in the studio, they were putting a hairspring in a quartz watch. And then just looking at the visuals of these movements, they're metal calibers. they're beautiful too. I mean, I think these are actually some pretty nice movements for the price range in which they occupy. So let's maybe talk about that idea around just these being built a little bit more for longevity, because it seems like there's a whole differentiation between how a 9F caliber is going to be constructed for the long term versus a lot of quartz calibers.
Yeah, no, I think that I knew you were going to bring up the spring.
Yeah.
That's a given. But when you look at 9F, as you mentioned, it's made of metal. It's a brass movement. It's beautifully finished. So all the bridges, which is kind of compartmentalized. So you have, your integrated circuit would be under this bottom bridge. The top bridge is where your keyless works are, your operating levers, and then the middle panel here is a very special attribute. This is our protective shield cabin. So this is where the gear train lies, and also where that little magical hairspring is. So obviously it's using a hairspring, but not for its typical purpose in watchmaking. So the hairspring is more for absorbing backlash. So the hairspring is actually attached to a gear, and that gear lies at the end of the gear train, and this we call the backlash auto adjust mechanism. So basically a quartz watch, when the second hand jumps from second to second, typically there's some play, there's some wiggle that occurs, and when it lands on the marker, it wiggles a little bit and might keep it off center. So our engineers brilliantly thought of this use of a hairspring, not in the conventional way, to absorb the backlash in the gear train, so when the second hand jumps, it lands assertively and on the marker. And that is a unique feature that you would find in this protective shield cabin. But the shield cabin itself is actually a construction, right? So you have the main plate, you have a mid bridge, and then you have the top bridge. And sandwiched in between is the gear train. And there are essentially walls that prevent dust from entering when you're changing the battery, right? Because not always, are you doing this in a dust-free environment. So we wanted to ensure that even the smallest piece of dust does not get into the gear train, because long-term it could cause issues. So that construction is also dramatically helping improve the longevity of the movement.
So Joe, my next question would be really around serviceability. So you have a 3-year battery life, but when a watch is sent back as a 9F, what is that process like? What are some of the considerations there in terms of the construction to think about that long term?
Yeah, I mean, so the idea is to create as long-lasting of a movement as possible, and to help retain, let's say, lubrication. This is a 9-joule quartz movement. You don't have to use joules in movements that are quartz, but in this instance, there are 9 of them. Not coincidence that it's 9F, 9 joules. It is a coincidence. But what's interesting about it is, if you look right here, you'll see this 1 joule that has what looks to be like, everyone I think knows dia shock.
Yes.
But we call this dia fix. So that kind of almost horseshoe-shaped spring is actually holding on a cap jewel that works with an open jewel or a hole jewel to retain lubricant for the rotor, for the step motor.
So that's what's going to drive the hands, basically, right?
Exactly. So it allows the lubricant to be controlled and distributed over a long course of time. And yeah, so like we talked about the protective shield construction, and Diafix is just adding to that increased longevity and durability. For simple things like servicing this movement, or let's say you need a battery change. You send it in, I always recommend to send it into the service center. At least that you're getting, the gaskets inspected and everything's pressure tested and things like that. But the battery itself is actually quite easy to change. I mean, you can see it's right on top, and you just pop it out and pop in a new one. However, at a service center, you can actually, we can test on a proprietary machine to ensure that the accuracy is within its guaranteed range. And if not, we also have the ability to adjust.
Little regulator switch right there.
By the
and
regulator
that's
switch.
Sending changing the electrical current to the quartz oscillator. Is that how
essentially, yeah. I mean, it's by applying different, let's say, a change in the current, you can slightly change the frequency of, it's always that baseline 32,768, but you can change its frequency slightly.
Interesting. Okay. And Joe, this is a nice looking movement. What are you calling all these surface treatments? I mean, you have the striping finish, but there's a lot of details here you normally will never see in a quartz watch.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously it's made made of metal, as we discussed, but the striping is just plain striping, similar to how we do on caliber 9R65 as an example, with a cutting process to create the stripes. And we have beveling all around the bridges. So, the aesthetic, it's 45-degree angle, mirror polished. I mean, the aesthetic is absolutely beautiful, especially, considering it's quartz and at its price point. So a lot of great attributes all the way around.
And then let's maybe transition to talking a little bit more about the outward appearance of the watches. We talked about 9F, more the calibers, but this is where we can also speak to some of those ideas like the double step with the second hand, the instantaneous date change, and give us maybe a sense right now with like 9F as a caliber and the different watches that are going to house it, because there's been a lot of changes recently. So where do you start if you wanted to get into 9F?
So, 9F, we start with models either like SPGX 261 or 263. They've been a mainstay since the brand went global in 2010. The SPGX 261, 63 right now are going to be 2,700. And that's the entry point in the Grand Seiko. And you get a Zaratsu polished case, you get, it's a 3-piece brushed bracelet and 37mm case, which was our most compact size for quite some time because of the size of the caliber itself. The 9F62 is what we use in this particular model with the date. The size is because, this movement, unlike spring drive as an example, right, coming from the same factory, which typically for an automatic movement has well over 250 components, this movement is over 130 components, but that's still more than most automatics.
Yes.
So it's really surprising to me. There's so much care and love and all hand assembled and put together in the same studio at the Shinshu Watch Studio. You have this amazing level of care, but we can also make a much more compact size with this movement. So we have the 9F62, which has the date display that you'll see here. We also make 9F61, which has no date, but I think that the date is like one of the best features. It's an instantaneous date, as you mentioned. So there's a reason why you don't see that on quartz watches.
Is it just the torque there's no availability of torque and being able to have the energy to be able to shift that forward? Is that usually the main challenge?
Exactly. So with 9F, right, we wanted to use big, bold hands like we use on all Grand Seikos. They have to be that Dauphine style, diamond cut, highly angular hands. And we can't use plastic or any other material besides metal, right? Typically brass is our material of choice, and the second hand typically is steel. And so, that makes it heavy. Compared to a lot of quartz watches, our steel second hand that you'll see on these is like 3 times heavier. So it's a lot, and it needs torque. So, torque in quartz watches is the reason why you can't use big, heavy hands, typically. But 9F, obviously, we found a solution to that. So we call our twin pulse motor, basically, instead of jumping from second to second, right? Have you ever seen 1 second was the old saying when we first came out with the quartz. This is actually moving twice in 1 second, but the middle step happens so fast that you can't see it unless you go in slow motion.
And then how is that allowing you to have a better use of energy, just because you don't have to actually use torque for it to all just jump forward all at once, and so you're doing an intermediate step is helping you in that process?
Exactly, yeah. So, it does help with the power consumption a little bit, but, you're talking about almost twice the torque of a conventional quartz watch. So it does, theoretically, it should eat the battery life much faster, right? So, you're instead of a 3-year, maybe it would be 1.5, right? That's difficult, but we needed to be energy efficient in every way possible because, as we mentioned earlier, it's also detecting temperature 540 times a day. There's a lot going on. So we need to be able to reduce power consumption as much as possible across the board in order to ensure high efficiency. So because of this dual-step motor, this 2-pulse action of the second hand that increases the torque, we also can use a mechanically driven instantaneous date. So it happens in a blink of an eye.
So there's not really a creep that's going to be happening over like multiple hours that you'll see in a lot of other watches.
I mean, there's still, yes, so there still is, but
it's like a matter of minutes rather than hours, right?
Yeah, the jump occurs very rapidly, but the engagement of the spring lever is still, operating over a course of time. However, it's not, the same limitations that you would find in a slow crawl date in terms of like setting and things like that. So.
And it'll probably keep the date also more square, because one of the challenges too, if you have a really long graduated change at that point, you might see the numerals get cut off pretty nasty in the.
Yeah, very true, very true. But we wanted to ensure high legibility across every format in this watch, and again, the engineering of the movement is what brought that to life.
And then some other collections too. So we're looking here at these entry points to 9F and really the brand Grand Seiko, and then there are a few other pockets also for different 9F calibers and different complication types. But we're looking at a newer inclusion to the family, but this is in addition to be the snowflake version of 9F, which is the 355. So this is now the 357. All right, there we go.
I knew you knew it.
Okay.
You could have guessed.
Okay. Sometimes you never know with Grand Seiko references.
No, there's some anomalies, we'll say. But so we now have, we've had the 355 now for a little while, and the 357 is a take on, what famously named the Skyflake dial, now in 37 millimeter, also in titanium like the 355, the white dial quartz snowflake. And so now we have a blue dial variation, but it's the same case, same bracelet, so it's essentially the same watch, just a new dial variation. And I think it's perfect, and I mean the texture plus this kind of distressed look of this sky blue is really, I think, one of the most beautiful dials that we could have.
Because texture is not something you'll typically see associated with 9F, like the same way as you get higher up in the brand's catalog.
Of course, yeah.
So this is a unique opportunity. You're spending a bit more than what we saw previously, but similar concept. You have the instantaneous change for the date.
But you have the titanium, so that's of course going to increase the cost. We also have a 5-piece bracelet on this, which will make it a little bit more as well.
Got it, yep.
And then the dial process. So it does end up a little bit more, but still at the end of the day, an incredible value. And I think that everyone loves the nature and textures of Grand Seiko, but I think also, if you want steel and you want something simple, the sunray finish that we do is exceptional. We do have a black lacquer option in the SBGX 261, but we also have the 6.3, which is that champagne silver color, and that's an incredibly complex dial to make too. And now we have also introduced at the same time as this blue snowflake or the skyflake is the 37 millimeter in a blue sunray finish dial. And so this 37 millimeter blue is something that's actually existed in the Japanese domestic market since the others were introduced. However, it wasn't sold globally. And now this model will be available on a global level. So.
And then in between these two collections, there's another collection, the SBGP series. That's the 013, and that'll be a 40 millimeter case.
Yeah, so the SBGP series has the 9F85 movement, so it's a little bit larger diameter caliber. At the same time, it also has a independently adjustable hour hand. So you can quick jump the hour as you're traveling without a GMT feature. Similarly, we have the 9F86, which is the GMT.
Which is also, I think, one of these really cool areas of interest for people that are into Grand Seiko and just honestly a GMT watch. You have isolated hour function for the local hour hand, so maybe something like the SBGN 027. This is like a fan favorite.
Yeah, great sports watch. Have the engraved bezel, and it's very. It's very nice to have a multi-time zone watch. I travel a lot, as you know, so
Yes, you do.
I find it very convenient. But I think that with the 9F, the size, the style, all of that just is a winning combination. And then just the convenience of the accuracy. It's running for 3 years, not for 3-day power reserve. There's a lot of practicality in it, and I think that's why it's the perfect fit. 9F is the perfect fit for Grand Seiko. We have mechanical, which is a part of our history and tradition. We have spring drive, which is a truly unique innovation, and then we have quartz because Grand Seiko was made to be the ultimate practical watch. There's nothing more practical. It's always accurate. It's always running pretty much, and you can grab it and go. You can set all your other watches to it. A lot of our customers do that.
Yep. I saw you just doing it a while ago.
Yeah. So it's it's really incredible. The benefits of 9F, but I think that there's a lot to offer in these movements and in these designs. Especially based on the size.
Yeah, and for me, I'm somebody that, I like mechanical watches because of this idea of being the antithesis of disposable goods, and that's the world in which we live in. But 9F is basically taking the very cerebral practicality that comes with everything that is brought forth by quartz and its accuracy, its durability, but then you have this hand craftsmanship that's mirrored with that, and I think that's, or combined with that, I think that's fantastic, and that I think is why it lands so well with so many people, especially people that are into Grand Seiko, which understand these ideas very well.
There's a misconception in the industry where quartz means cheap, and we are really showing that it is not. It's really something that's exceptional and you can be proud of.
Well, Joe, thank you so much. As I stated, 9F was something that we had not yet talked about, so I'm very happy to do it, and I really appreciate you walking through all the details of what 9F has to offer.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Thank you again, sir.
All right, thanks, Teddy.